Hello, everyone, and welcome to my lecture, Exploring Ancient Greece. Now, for those of you that don't know me, I am Dr. Brownbear, and I usually go around the circuits of lecture halls talking about healthcare related topics, but I decided to branch out a little bit and focus on a topic that fascinates me, and that is ancient Greece. Now, those of you that are watching on a phone, that might not be the best place to do this. We want to make sure that you're watching on full screen because I'm going to give you a lot of information on this PowerPoint and I don't want you to miss any of it. So, as we're going through this lecture and you realize, hey, I want to look even deeper into the topic, I've listed two of my most recent publications so you can really dig in and find even more fascinating information. If you want me to appear at your school or institution and give a lecture, please give me an email and I'll be sure to get back to you. And a reminder, please no unauthorized recording, sharing of this lecture. I put a lot of research and thought into these presentations, and I would just ask that you refrain from that. All right, well, let's get started, shall we? I'm going to start off with the course objectives, and the first thing we want to do is define Greece as a country. Now, how do we do that? Well, let's take a look at what we know about Greece today. Can we trace what we see today back to its origins? Well, that's what we're going to attempt to do. And that includes the natural and biological history of Greece, that includes the mythology and the religion of Greece, and of course, to tie everything up, we're going to look at the political and cultural considerations. So, when we begin looking at Greece, we know some basic facts. Greece is the island country. In fact, it's composed of many islands, estimated to be about 1,000 islands. So that's why whenever you see Greek food, such as salad, it's common to have Thousand Island dressing with it. And it's very small. It's only about the size of Massachusetts, but is completely surrounded by the Midichlorian Sea, which offers a great natural defense against attacking forces. On top of that, Greece is part of the European Union, which means that travel between countries and even currency such as the gyro is something that we know that Greece utilizes. I'm going to look at current demographics with you. If you look at the chart on the right, you'll notice that there's slightly more women than men in Greece, which means if you're a guy, you have great odds, right? Well, there's one problem with such a small country. There's over 12 billion people that reside there, the majority of which are over the age of 60. Another startling fact is that Greece actually is the second highest body hair per capita country that we know of today. It follows only Italy. Tourism is very important because it is the major driver of the Greek economy. And what does that include? Well, it's an umbrella for many things. It includes food, festivals, visiting ancient sites, senior citizen orgies. There's a lot that gets covered by tourism. And one thing that you'll notice is that today, which is different than the past, is that Greek is a very Christian country. In fact, it is the home of the Orthodox Pope. And you may be thinking, is there a big difference between Orthodox Christianity and Roman Catholic? And yes, and the reason for that is there was the great schism that happened, the separating of the church. The Roman Catholics use red wine to represent the blood of Christ, where people in Greece, in practicing the Orthodox version, believe that white wine should be used for the blood, and that's because of Jesus' immune response to constant sin. Thus, we have the white wine. So that's just a snapshot of what we know about Greece today. Let's dig into ancient Greece. So, many, many years ago, Greece was a drifting continent. About 4 billion years ago, all of the major landmasses of the Earth were formed together. And what I did is I drew a red circle around the area that would one day become Greece. So that's 4 billion years ago. Let's fast forward at least 100 years. After 100 years, you'll see that land starts to take shape in the Europe that we know today. Now, this origin may be why that salsa dancing is so prevalent in Greek. If you look at the South America area of that map on the left, you'll notice it borders the Greek or future Greek land. So Greece is known as the island of city-states, but it wasn't always that way. You see, it started as farm villages because Greece had a very agricultural-based economy. And in ancient times, what really drove the development of these farm villages was marketplaces where people can trade products and learn to incorporate new technologies. And you'd begin to see that these city-states would arise as a result. And they really ruled the Greek continent, and they protected the Greek people with their own local rule. And I want to talk about three leaders that emerged as part of the city-state landscape. Of course, it would be Athens, Sparta, and the neighboring Persian Empire. Let's begin by talking about Athens. Athens was a cultural and educational hotbed of Greece. They were very progressive in their ideas. They developed technology rather than having a very robust army. So they discovered a lot of things that had never been done before. And part of what drove this was that they housed some of the most famous philosophers and writers that we would ever see in history. And this includes people such as Plato and Socrates. So I want to talk about, in particular, Socrates, who was known as the father of Western civilization. And he invented something called the Socratic method. How do we define the Socratic method? Well, it's something that's used in schools still today. Basically what it is a teacher will ask a student questions until they get something wrong, and that is the Socratic method. But we can use that to discover the answer to important questions. Questions like, what is it to be just? Can we discover what is immoral versus moral? And Socrates famously would ask, what that mouth do? Unfortunately, those questions are the kinds of things that would get Socrates in trouble. He would very routinely anger politicians and leaders in Athens. And one of the things that Socrates stood for was democracy, but a different one than we know today. Socrates believed that in a democracy that was ideal, only people that were smart could vote. Well, one day he angered the last politician he could until the inevitable happened, and that was being sentenced to death. So he was sentenced to death by drinking hemlock poison. So he had all of his followers surround him, and he still lit up those politicians as he was dying. Thankfully, there were some people, especially star pupils, that would carry on Socrates' work. And in particular, you could see the progression through Plato and Aristotle. Sparta. Now we have an entirely different beast. The city-state of Sparta was very militaristic. In fact, they didn't care how smart someone was, but were they strong? Could they fight well in battle? Those were the things that mattered to them. And one of the most ironic things is that Sparta actually valued and gave more rights to their women than the Athenians did. And this would actually trigger one of the most famous wars between Athens and Sparta, which I'll touch on in just a little bit here. One of the things that is so legendary about Sparta is the upbringing that they would give their soldiers. And it started at a very young age, but it did create a problem. They had a terrible infant mortality rate, and their rate actually equaled the mortality rate for the USA. See, the Spartans tested their strength of the toddlers by throwing them into a lion pit, and only those that could overcome the lions were allowed to grow and become Spartan soldiers. They became worthy. As a response, Athens formed the group Peta in response to this very barbaric, as they saw, upbringing and mistreatment of lions. So, now that we know a little bit about each city-state, I want to talk about the Peloponnesian War. And this is when Athens and Sparta could not solve their differences, and like I mentioned before, it was an issue of women's rights. You see, the Athenians discovered something that had not been discovered before in human history, and that was anal sex. Now, they believed that only men should enjoy this activity, where the Spartans encouraged the women to join as well. As a result, there was the Peloponnesian War that lasted for about 5 years. And after those 5 years of grim, oily turmoil, there was finally a winner, and Spartan armies defeated the Athenians. Interestingly enough, that they left Athens intact. They did not raise Athens to the grounds, which will play an important part in the next chapter in Greek history. And that is to say that the Persian army is going to know, or the Persian army is going to make its presence known. And the reason the Persian army set its sights onto Greece was because Athens was aiding one of their enslaved populations. So as a result, Darius the king led an attack against the Athens people in 490 BC. Now, of course, if you're Athens, who are you going to ask for help right away? Obviously, it's going to be Sparta. But Sparta did not come to their aid. They simply replied, "We're sorry, we can't fight. It's Greek Easter," which seemed like not a great excuse considering it was 490 BC, but Athens still went to war anyways. And believe it or not, they defeated the Persians, which was great because they can finally show that they had the mettle to defend their land without the aid of others. There's one famous story I want to talk about that traces back to this war with the Persian army, and it's when a messenger ran from Marathon, Greece to Athens. He didn't stop running. It was 26 miles, just nonstop at a high speed, and finally, when he went to report the victory to Athens, he got there, and right away, he yelled, "Fuck!" then collapsed and died. And that's how Adidas got their slogan. Fast forward a little bit, and the Persian army returns. Xerxes and his army of immortals came to fight again. And Xerxes was the son of Darius, the old king that attacked. And this is the battle, or the war, that is more commonly depicted in movies and literature. This is where the Spartans had their stand of their 300 at Thermopylae. And one thing I want to really point out is that the Persian army had higher numbers than any army we've ever seen before. In fact, they said that there were enough arrows to blot out the sun. Well, when anything celestial gets involved, I like to email my colleague, Neil deGrasse Tyson. And I asked him this question about those arrows. Is it possible for the arrows to completely block out sunlight? What were the turning points in the Greek war against the Persians? And in your opinion, how did this change the political course of history? And 1 second, let me just pull up his email. He's kind enough to give us a response that said, "One of the most remarkable facts is that the same atoms that comprise the Persians can be traced back to the crucibles of a super sun that exploded its cosmic guts and would one day form the solar system we now reside." Okay, thanks, Neil. Well, it should be no surprise then that I already mentioned that there was that 300 Spartan last stand, but the Greeks do end up prevailing. Even though the 300 Spartans were defeated, they exacted a heavy toll from the Persians. And as a result, the Athenians and the rest of Greece were able to finish the job and completely drive back the Persian army. They were still outnumbered. So how did they really drive back that army? Well, there's one thing the Persians didn't think about, and it was that the Athenians had superior air power. And that goes to show that Athens, because they placed so much importance on technology, they were able to defend themselves better than, say, a more militaristic society. So Xerxes retreats and attempts to merge the empire by offering marriage to Plato. This was kind of strange that he went a diplomatic route, but Plato, he was frank with him, said, I'd rather just remain friends. So that's how we got platonic friends, and that's how we got the war with Persia to finally stop recurring. So we have finally a united Greece. The Persian army, they retreated, like I said, and they had to give up land. So, for example, they had to give up Poland. Now, if you're Greek, this has been a very high octane period of your history, and boredom set in. You don't have Xbox 350s to play around on. There's nothing to do. So here comes what we would know as the Olympics. The Olympic Games are created, and that would be one of the most popular forms of entertainment that even still exists to this day to test the most elite athletes that we know. All right, let's take a quick 15-minute break here. I'll be right back with the part 2 of our lecture, and we're going to dive more into the history and mythos of Greece. So be right back. And like I said, let's take 15.